They said I was too pretty to stand next to the bride. Can you imagine hearing those words from your own family? Not as a compliment, but as a curse. To them, my face, my hair, my smile, everything I was born with, became a threat to my sister's perfect day. They weren't asking me politely to step aside. They were planning, scheming, and tearing me down to make sure I wouldn't ruin her wedding pictures. At first, I thought it was just jealousy, something small I could brush off. But I was wrong. What they did to me before that wedding went beyond cruel. And that's when I decided. If they wanted me gone, humiliated and forgotten, I would give them something else entirely. My payback wasn't loud, but it was unforgettable. And it left everyone at that wedding speechless, especially the bride herself. To understand why my revenge hit so hard, you need to know a little about my family, especially my sister. Growing up, she was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. My parents adored her, bragged about her, and shielded her from even the smallest criticism. Me. I was the shadow in the background. Not unloved exactly, but always compared, always reminded that I should never outshine her. If she sang, I had to clap louder. If she dressed up, I had to tone myself down. By the time we were teenagers, the difference between us was obvious. She was the one my parents described as responsible and mature. I was the one labeled as difficult and too emotional. But here's the twist. People outside our family often told me I was the prettier one. I didn't ask for it. I didn't flaunt it. But relatives, friends, even strangers sometimes made the comment. And every time they did, I saw the way my sister's smile tightened, the way her eyes hardened. She never said it outright, but I knew. She resented me for the way I looked. Fast forward a few years, and my sister was getting married. You'd think a wedding would bring a family together, right? But in my case, it exposed every crack, every buried resentment, and every ounce of favoritism my parents had always shown her. From the moment the engagement was announced, the focus wasn't just on her happiness. It was also on controlling me, what I wore, how I styled my hair, how much makeup I used. My parents kept repeating the same phrase, "This is her day, not yours. Don't steal her spotlight." At first, I laughed it off. I thought they were being dramatic. I mean, who worries that much about the bridesmaid? But then it got worse. Comments like, "Maybe don't wear heels, you're already taller than her." Or, "Could you wear less makeup? We don't want anyone distracted in the photos." The breaking point came one night when I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. My mom's exact words were, "She's just too pretty. Next to the bride, it will look wrong." Too pretty. As if my existence was some kind of problem to solve. That's when I realized they weren't going to stop. They weren't going to let me just show up, celebrate, and support my sister like a normal sibling. They had a plan to dim me, to cut me down until I was nothing but a background prop at the wedding. And I'll admit, at first it worked. They made me feel small, guilty, like I owed it to my sister to shrink myself so she could shine. But guilt only lasts so long. Eventually, humiliation turns into anger. And anger? That's fuel. So I decided, if they thought they could erase me, embarrass me, and control me, they had another thing coming. This wasn't just about being too pretty. This was about being silenced, disrespected, and treated like my life only existed in the shadow of my sister's happiness. And that's where the story really begins. The weeks leading up to the wedding should have been full of joy, laughter, dress fittings, food tastings, and endless chatter about the big day. But in my house, it was something else entirely. It felt like a campaign against me, carefully disguised as helping my sister have her special moment. It started subtly. My mom would drop hints at the dinner table. Maybe wear your hair up, it'll look more formal. My dad would add, nothing too flashy, okay? You don't want to draw attention. I'd smile politely and nod, but inside I was asking myself, Why me? Why all these restrictions? Nobody else in the bridal party was being told how to stand, dress, or smile. Then came the dress fitting. My sister had chosen pale lavender gowns for her bridesmaids, simple, floor length, and elegant. But when it came time for me to try mine on, something was off. The dress handed to me looked different. The color was slightly duller, the cut was less flattering, and it fit awkwardly around the waist. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I asked the seamstress, "Are you sure this is mine?" She glanced nervously at my sister, then quickly said, "Yes, that's the one your mom approved." I looked at my sister. She smirked. Not a playful smirk, the kind that hides satisfaction in someone else's pain. I wanted to call it out right there, but my parents were in the room. And when I hesitated, my mom swooped in with her usual guilt tactics. "Sweetheart, it's just a dress. Don't make everything about yourself." Just a dress. Right. A dress intentionally chosen to make me fade into the background while everyone else looked polished and radiant. I swallowed my pride and stayed silent. But that silence was heavy. The next blow came at the hair salon. My sister had booked appointments for all her bridesmaids to get styled the morning of the wedding. She handed out references, glossy pictures from Pinterest, and everyone got to pick their look. When it was my turn, the stylist hesitated. She whispered something to my sister, then said to me, "Your mom asked for something simpler, nothing too bold." Simpler. Translation. Boring. Bland. Forgettable. I sat there, staring at myself in the mirror, my long hair pinned back into a lifeless bun while the other girls got curls, waves, and intricate braids. My sister looked thrilled. My parents? Even more so. It was clear now. They didn't just want me toned down. They wanted me invisible. And the comments didn't stop. The night before the wedding, while we were setting up decorations, my mom pulled me aside. Her voice was sharp, though she tried to make it sound sweet. "Honey, tomorrow isn't about you. Remember that. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't stand too close to the groom's family in pictures, and please, for God's sake, don't wear too much makeup." I stood there in silence, but inside my blood was boiling. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't stand too close. Who says that to their own child? But the cruelest moment was yet to come. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to find something strange. My makeup bag was missing. The one I'd packed carefully the night before with my favorite foundation, lip color, and eyeshadow. Gone. Vanished. I searched the room, panicking. When I finally asked my mom, she gave me this dismissive shrug. "Oh, maybe you misplaced it. Just borrow something from the other bridesmaids." But I knew better. I knew exactly what had happened. My sister had misplaced it for me. That ass when it hit me like a punch in the chest. They were willing to sabotage me to make sure I looked plain, maybe even ugly, in the wedding photos. And the worst part? My parents were on her side. I felt humiliated, betrayed, like my own family had decided I wasn't a tea worthy of being myself. Not on that day, not ever. For a while, I genuinely considered backing out. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should just stay out of the way and let my sister have her perfect day. Maybe if I disappeared into the background, everyone would be happy. But then, I looked in the mirror. My plain bun, my dull dress, my bare face, and beneath all of it, the fire in my eyes. They could try to strip away my confidence, but they couldn't touch the truth. I was still me, and I wasn't going to let them win. That's when the seed of revenge was planted. It wasn't about being prettier than my sister. It wasn't about stealing the spotlight. It was about respect. About showing them that no matter how hard they tried to cut me down, I would always rise back up. So I smiled, played along, and acted like their little plan had worked. Inside, though, I was already planning how to turn the entire day upside down, in a way none of them would ever forget. I told myself I'd keep my cool, play the part, be the quiet, supportive sister who didn't make waves. But the truth has a way of boiling over, no matter how carefully you gate it. The more they tried to erase me, the louder my anger grew, until it felt like a live thing crawling under my skin. Morning of the wedding, the house moved with nervous energy. Voices floated down the hallway, the clink of silverware, the muffled thump of speakers testing the playlist. I walked downstairs with my lifeless bun and borrowed lipstick, pretending not to notice the way my sister S bridesmaids twirled with their soft waves and perfect makeup. Pretending was hard work. My jaw ached from holding in the words that wanted to spill out. People arrived with gifts and congratulations. Old aunts fussed over the bride. Cousins hugged, kissed, took pictures. My mom greeted guests like she'd been rehearsing for months, smiling with the practiced glow of someone who knows she's won. My father kept glancing at me like a judge inspecting a result he'd helped produce. Every look felt like a verdict. At the rehearsal, my role was spelled out in quiet, sharp tones. Stand beside her, but not too close. Smile, but don't draw attention. It felt absurd to be coached like this by my own family. I wanted to laugh until I cried. Instead, I forced a small, obedient smile and recited the lines they fed me. When I walked into the salon that morning, I thought maybe the small kindnesses from a stranger, an actual stylist with no family stake, would soften the edges. But even there, the damage followed me. One of the assistants, a college girl with a bright blush, leaned in and whispered, "They told me to make your look simple." Her voice had pity in it. And pity is a hard thing to swallow when you're already being swallowed by shame. By noon, tension was a physical thing. My stomach knotted so tight I could barely eat. I kept replaying their words. Too pretty. Don't steal her spotlight. The phrases looped like nails being hammered into a board. I felt boxed in, like I'd been put on stage and told to freeze. The first real shame came in front of the photographer. He lined us up, told jokes about warm smiles, and asked us to get close for the family shot. My sister leaned in, eyes bright, and our parents clustered protectively around her. Then the photographer said, "Okay, now, name. Could you step back just a little? We want the focus on the bride here." The words landed like a slap. All around me, laughter bubbled politely, but I felt blood rushing to my face. I took a step back, like a puppet obeying strings. You learn a lot about people when they're watching. My friends tried to squeeze my hand under the table, offering small, tight smiles that said they were on my side. But smiles like that don't change the script. The elders, the aunts with their cameras, the cousins who loved gossip, they all snipped at the margins of my confidence. My dad stood there as if proud, as if he'd done the right thing. My mother glowed like a conductor pleased with the final performance. The worst part was how quickly people fell in line. No one stopped it. No one questioned it. My sister S' best friend adjusted her own position to make the bride more central in every photo. My bridesmaids leaned forward and laughed louder at the bride's jokes. It wasn't enough that my family wanted her perfect day. They wanted every frame to prove it. Between the ceremony and the reception, a relative approached me with what was supposed to be a gentle warning. "You're so beautiful," she said, eyes darting to my pinned-back hair. "Maybe next time, do something different. It's best not to compete." She smiled, like she'd given advice. Her voice was syrupy, and I could hear the approval in it for the plan that had unfolded. That comment tightened something inside me until my hands shook. This wasn't just an isolated moment. It was an entire network of people tacitly agreeing that I should be less attractive, less noticeable, less worthy of joy on that day. My heart pounded like a protest drummer in my chest. As the ceremony began, I sat in the pew, hands clasped in my lap. The church smelled of lilies and wax and the glossy sheen of new programs. My sister walked down the aisle, and the world paused, exactly how she and Mom wanted it to. Everyone wept, everyone smiled, everyone praised how perfect she looked. And I clapped, lips tight, tears forced into polite edges. On the surface, I kept my composure. Inside, shame and fury braided together. I'd expected sadness, sure. But the real feeling that ran beneath everything was betrayal. Not only had my family tried to change my appearance, they'd tried to change the rules of how I was allowed to exist in my own life. They'd decided I wasn't allowed to be beautiful and still be loved. That was the theft that hurt the most. The reception was a carousel of smiles and whispered judgments. People told me how lovely I still looked. Papered compliments that really meant, "You look passable." I ate small bites, laughed when prompted, and posed for the obligatory group shots where I stood 3 steps back from the bride. As the evening wore on, a cousin ES drunken comment, she ought to have stolen the show if she wanted, rolled around the tables like a secret to be shared, then swallowed. They meant it as either warning or pity. I couldn't tell which. It all blurred into noise. But while everyone danced and toasted and told stories about the couple, I sat with a plan forming. Anger had its own architecture. It quieted, organized, and wanted to be useful. If they'd tried to erase me in photographs and silence me with petty instructions, then my response had to be something they couldn't control. It had to be honest, undeniable, and public. I started by collecting small truths, moments that could not be edited out by a photographer, cropping, or by a family, careful instructions. A recorded joke here, a slipped comment there, the receipts for dresses, the timeline of demands. Each memory and small proof was a stone I placed in a stack. I kept my face calm while my mind assembled a map. At one point, a bridesmaid hurried over, whispering, "They're talking about how to crop the family photo. Make sure the bride is centered." She looked mortified as she said it, and in that instant I realized this wasn't just about one day. They were curating the narrative of the family for years to come. Photographs decide how people remember you. They would preserve my diminished image and pass it on as fact. That thought changed everything. If photographs were a weapon, then truth could be the counterweapon. If they could stage my invisibility, I could stage exposure. Not a dramatic breakdown, not a shouted accusation, but a reveal so complete that the family album itself would tell the truth. I let the night play out, collecting small confirmations, noting who laughed where, who stepped forward to defend the bride, who clapped without thinking. When the DJ played the slow song and my sister pulled her new husband to the floor, I stepped out under the lights and nothing dramatic happened. I sat back down, smiled, pretended like the plan was still theirs to write. But inside, the plan had already begun to take shape. The humiliation had pushed me from hurt to strategy. They had tried to make me less. I was about to make them remember exactly who I was. The last shot of the night was to be the group photograph. Everyone together, smiles, the memory they'd keep. As the photographer guided us into position, my pulse thudded. Cameras flashed and people laughed, the orchestra of their rehearsed happiness humming around me. I let my expression be soft but measured. I let them think they had succeeded. Because when you wait, when you collect, when you breathe through the sting, you can strike in a way that can't be brushed off as drama. And that's exactly what I plan to do. The reception lights blurred into a halo of offending perfection as I sat and schemed. I wanted something clean, precise. No shouting, no tears that could be written off as overreacting. I wanted them to feel the sting of their choices reflected back at them, to see themselves as they'd made me feel. Small, edited, erased. Revenge didn't have to be cruel to be effective. It just had to be unavoidable. So I began with the facts. Photographs were their tool. Carefully cropped family albums, framed shots on mantels, the curated version of memory. If they wanted to manufacture history by positioning me 3 steps back, I would manufacture a counter-history. I would get the truth into the permanent record. I would force their narrative into the open like light into a dark room. First step, evidence. Not gossip, not rage, evidence. I collected what I could without being obvious. My phone, once an object of impulse, became an instrument of purpose. I recorded conversations when the tone turned poisonous. I kept screenshots of messages where my mom suggested subtle changes to my appearance. I saved receipts from the dress shop, documentation that proved which dress had been bought and who had approved it. When my makeup bag turned up missing, I wrote down who had access to my room that night. Little things, but together they formed a pattern of intent rather than accident. Second step, allies. I couldn't and didn't want to fight this alone. There were people at the wedding who had watched the show with quiet discomfort, friends who squeezed my hand under the table, a bridesmaid who looked mortified when asked to center the bride. I pulled one aside later that night, over coffee when the drunken fog of the reception had thinned. She didn't judge. She didn't lecture. She offered a simple nod and a promise to stand with me if I asked for it. Third step, timing. The reveal had to be public enough to matter, private enough to avoid spectacle. I wanted subtle humiliation that cut to the bone, not a viral social media circus. The obvious moment was the photo album, the tangible, printable memory people kept on their walls. But albums aren't made in a single night. They're assembled later, months from now. I needed something immediate, a moment that would ripple outward and change the way everyone would remember that day. Then I thought about the toasts. Everyone listens to toasts. People freeze, listen closely, and the sober, thoughtful remarks get remembered. If I could craft a short, measured speech, one that sounded like gratitude at first and then gently peeled back to the truth, it would echo. It would put facts into words in front of witnesses, not just on my phone in the middle of the night. So I wrote a toast. It wasn't a scream. It was a blade wrapped in velvet. I practiced it in the mirror. Warm smile, soft voice, the rhythm of someone giving thanks. The first half would be familiar. Praise for the couple, gratitude for being included. Then a pivot. Gentle, almost conversational, pointing out the small acts that matter. Who supports whom, who lifts up who makes sacrifices and who makes demands. The final line would be simple, precise, devastating. We all remember what we choose to put front and center. I imagined the pause that would follow that line. I imagined cameras lifting, phones angling. I imagined their faces as the implication settled in, that I knew, and that I wouldn't let it be edited away. But a toast alone wasn't enough. If I wanted to be certain, I needed one more piece. A visual, irrefutable moment. I thought of the group photo, the one they'd carefully arranged to keep me in the background. If I could control that moment, if I could make a single image that contradicted every cropped frame they planned, I could disrupt their whole narrative. The plan took shape like architecture. During the last dance, I would ask for the microphone. I would deliver the toast. I would keep my voice steady, my eyes on the people who mattered most. Then, at the very end of the speech, I would stand and walk to the front of the group photo, deliberately positioning myself not in the background, but in the center, near the bride. The photographer, thinking it was part of the celebration, would snap the shot. That single frame, later printed and framed, would contradict all their edits. It would show me where I refused to be hidden. There were risks, big ones. If this came across as grandstanding, I'd be the villain. If I stumbled over my words, they'd call it an attention-seeking stunt. I had to be precise. I rehearsed the words until they felt natural. I visualized my posture, my smile, the light in my eyes. Calm, dignified, unafraid. Conversations that follow big reveals often pick apart motive. I'd prepared for that too. I made backups, copies of the receipts, the text suggesting my hair be pinned and my makeup reduced, notes about who had entered my room that night. I stored them in my bag, and I sent a sealed email to the friend I trusted most, with a single subject line. If I go missing, open this. It was theatrical, but it was also practical. If anything went sideways, if they tried to gaslight me or claim I owed fabricated evidence, I had documents and witnesses. In quiet moments, as I moved through the wedding planning chaos, I felt the moral weight of what I planned. This wasn't about vanity. It wasn't about being pretty or not pretty. It was about agency, about refusing to be edited out of my life by people who believed their priorities trumped my dignity. I told myself, over and over, that exposing the truth was not petty, it was necessary. They had taught me to shrink for their comfort. I had decided to stop. The evening before the big moment, I slept poorly, mind racing with phrasing and timing. At 3 a.m, I sat on the edge of the bed and recited the toast until my voice matched the resolve in my chest. I pictured my mother's expression, my sister's look when the room realized the implications. I didn't want their shame to be brutal. I wanted it to be undeniable. On the day, I moved through rituals like a woman with two faces, the obedient daughter, the composed bridesmaid. I smiled. I touched shoulders. I wiped a tear when the song demanded it. But under that smile, there was activity. Small checks, a gentle word to the bridesmaid who had promised to stand with me, a confirmation that the photographer would take the group shot when prompted. As dusk turned to evening and the speeches began, I felt the room lean toward the microphone, hungry for warm, nostalgic words. The bride's father spoke, guests clapped, and then the moment arrived. The host raised his glass and asked for toasts. I felt my pulse steady. This was it. I stood up, walked forward with measured steps, and took the mic as if gratitude were the only thing on my mind. I spoke the first lines like a practiced actress, warm, sincere. People's faces softened. They smiled and listened. Then the pivot came. My words shifted, gentle at first, then precise, like a scalpel cutting through tissue. They say photos tell the truth about who we were that day, I said, my voice low enough that those closest leaned in. But what if the truth is decided beforehand? What if someone chooses which faces to remember and which to hide? A hush fell. I kept going, not shouting, not pleading. I told a small truth about how memories are curated, and then I mentioned, almost conversationally, that choices are made, some kind, some small, some meant to erase. I watched faces change, color draining, breath catching. I finished my toast with the line I'd practiced 1,000 times. If we only show what we want remembered, we erase what we owe to each other. Then I stood. I walked to the front, stepped into the space where the photographer was setting up the family shot, and I waited, calm and centered, until the camera clicked. In that pause, with everyone's eyes on me, something shifted. The curated narrative they'd labored to construct met a deliberate, unalterable image, me refusing to be cropped out. The silence that followed the shutter was louder than any argument. The sound of the shutter echoed in my chest long after it faded from the room. A single click, a single frame, but it carried the weight of everything they'd tried to erase. The moment I stepped into that photo, I felt the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. My mother's face tightened, a flash of panic she tried to disguise with a brittle smile. My sister froze, lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. The photographer, oblivious, simply gave me a cheerful nod, as though I'd done nothing more than strike a pose. But the guests noticed. Oh, they noticed. There is a kind of silence that doesn't come from absence of sound. It comes from everyone holding their breath at once. That's what followed me back to my chair. A silence filled with questions no one dared to voice aloud. And then, slowly, the world resumed. Glasses clinked. The band played on. The bride forced a laugh that came out jagged. But under it all, tension curled like smoke, thick and suffocating. After the toast, The bride's friends avoided my eyes. A few, though, looked almost impressed, lips twitching as if holding back smirks. One bridesmaid gave me the faintest nod, the kind you share with someone who just pulled off a move everyone else only dreams about. My parents didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. They circled the bride like guards around a queen, their bodies angled away from mine. My sister clung to her husband's arm, whispering fiercely into his ear, glancing at me like I had spat in her drink. And yet, none of them dared to confront me in front of the guests. They couldn't. To cause a scene now would mean admitting there was something to cause a scene about. That was my first victory. Their silence. What I hadn't expected was the whispers. Guests, emboldened by champagne, began asking quiet questions at their tables. Did you hear what she said in her toast? Do you think it was about the photos? I noticed she wasn't in the front earlier. Did you? The story spread faster than I could track. What I had done in 10 minutes rewrote the entire narrative of the evening. No longer was it about my sister's perfect day. It was about the strange, charged undercurrent between sisters, the speech that left everyone unsettled, the photo no one would forget. And that's when I realized, revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about exposure. It's about holding up a mirror and making them look. My sister, desperate to regain control, called the photographer over later, insisting on retakes. She tried to reposition me, her hand firm on my arm, guiding me backward. But by then, it was too late. Too many people had already seen me step forward. Too many eyes had witnessed that moment. The damage was done. It wasn't until the guests left, until the music died and only family lingered, that the confrontation came. My mother's voice cracked the silence like a whip. What was that? What were you trying to prove? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I was proving I exist, I said. That you don't get to erase me just because it makes her shine brighter. My sister's face twisted. You made it about you, on my wedding day. Do you have any idea how selfish that is? I laughed, bitter but quiet. Selfish? You cut my hair in my sleep. You hid my makeup. You bought me a dress designed to fade into the background. And I'm selfish for stepping into one photo? They had no response. None that mattered. Their silence was the closest thing to an admission I would ever get. My father muttered something about family unity and keeping peace, but I cut him off. Peace doesn't come from erasing people. It comes from respect. And you've never given me any. That ended the conversation. In the days that followed, photos of the wedding began to surface online. Carefully chosen, carefully cropped. And yet, no matter how hard they tried, the memory of that one photo lingered in everyone's minds. I didn't need to post it. I didn't need to say another word. The people who had been there remembered. And when people remember, they talk. Some reached out privately. Guests who admitted they'd seen the way I was pushed aside, the way I was diminished. They told me they admired how calmly I had handled it. That small validation meant more than I expected. My family, of course, pretended nothing happened. They acted as though the toast was just another speech, the photo just another frame. But I knew better. I saw the flicker in their eyes every time my name came up, the way their smiles faltered when someone mentioned that speech. And deep down, I knew they understood. I wouldn't be erased again. The morning after the wedding, the house felt like a battlefield abandoned overnight. Empty champagne glasses, crumpled napkins, wilting flowers. Everything was still there, but the energy had drained out. I woke up with a strange calm. Normally, after a fight with my family, I'd feel sick with guilt, replaying every word I'd said, wondering if I'd gone too far. But this time, I didn't. I felt lighter, almost weightless. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from friends, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in months. I heard your speech. Wow, that took guts. You looked stunning. No wonder they tried to keep you out of the spotlight. Honestly, I respect the hell out of you for standing up for yourself. Every ping felt like a little spark of validation, a reminder that I hadn't just imagined the cruelty I'd been subjected to. People had seen. People had understood. At breakfast, the tension in the house was thick enough to slice. My parents were silent, eyes fixed on their plates. My sister, pale and puffy-eyed, didn't say a word. I could tell she wanted to. Her lips twitched with words unsaid. But she didn't. Maybe she knew nothing she said could undo what had already been done. Over the next week, something shifted. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the daughter who blended into corners, who avoided conflict, who let her older sister take center stage. I'd told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that keeping peace was better than being seen. But peace without respect isn't peace at all. It's surrender. I started realizing how many moments I'd let slip through my fingers. Times when my sister had cut me off mid-sentence. Times when my parents had praised her accomplishments while barely acknowledging mine. Times when my needs, my feelings, had been pushed to the bottom of the pile because she was louder, bolder, the star. The wedding had been a tipping point, yes, but it was built on years of smaller wounds. Each one had left a mark, invisible maybe, but real. And standing up for myself that night wasn't just about the hair or the dress or the photos. It was about reclaiming all those years of being diminished. Funny thing was, once I stopped apologizing for existing, other people started treating me differently too. At work, I spoke up in meetings more. Friends noticed when I set boundaries, and instead of pushing back, they respected it. Even my posture changed. I walked taller, shoulders back, like I finally believed I had a right to take up space. My relationship with my family didn't heal overnight. Honestly, it may never fully heal. For months after the wedding, there was a coolness in every conversation. Calls became shorter, visits less frequent. My sister avoided me entirely, sending only clipped texts when absolutely necessary. At first, that distance hurt. Family is supposed to be unconditional, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Love without respect is just control dressed up pretty, and I wasn't going to be controlled anymore. Over time, though, the silence spoke louder than words. At family gatherings, relatives began to notice. Aunts and cousins pulled me aside, whispering things like, "I don't know what happened at the wedding, but good for you. You looked strong, confident." Even my grandmother, who rarely involved herself in drama, squeezed my hand one afternoon and said quietly, "They can't take your light, no matter how hard they try." And maybe the sweetest irony? My sister's attempts to paint me as the villain backfired. The more she complained, the more people started questioning her behavior. Why was she so threatened by her own sister? They'd ask. No matter how she spun it, the fact remained. She'd tried to erase me, and I hadn't let her. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of shame. That burden wasn't mine to carry anymore. Looking back now, I realize revenge isn't always about destruction. It isn't about tearing someone else down. It's about standing tall when they try to cut you down. It's about forcing the world to see what others tried to hide. My brutal payback wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was a mirror, reflecting their pettiness back at them. And in that reflection, they couldn't escape the truth. Their actions came from insecurity, from fear, from jealousy. The lesson? Never shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. Never apologize for existing, for shining, for being who you are. The people who truly love you will never ask you to dim your light. They'll celebrate it. I thought revenge would taste sweet because it would hurt them. But what made it sweet was how it healed me. It gave me back the voice I'd lost, the confidence I'd buried, the self-respect I desperately needed. And maybe, just maybe, the real revenge wasn't the photo, or the toast, or the whispers that followed. The real revenge was me, finally living unapologetically, no longer asking for permission to be myself. Months after the wedding, life had settled into a strange kind of normal. My sister and I weren't close anymore, but I didn't grieve that loss the way I thought I would. Some relationships are healthier with distance, and ours was one of them. My parents still made occasional comments, subtle digs meant to remind me of my place. But here's the difference. I stopped internalizing them. Before, their words would have pierced me, kept me awake at night. Now, they slid off me like water on glass. I had seen too clearly who they were when their masks slipped. And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. I realized something important. For years, I had been waiting for them to validate me, to finally say, "We're proud of you," or "You're beautiful," or even, "We see you." But that day may never come. And that's okay, because I don't need their validation anymore. The photo, the toast, the fallout, it all forced me to stop begging for scraps of recognition and start feeding myself with something stronger: self-respect. When I look back at the wedding now, I don't feel bitterness. I feel pride. Pride that I didn't let them erase me. Pride that I stood up, even when my voice shook. Pride that I finally broke free from a role I was never meant to play. The shadow, the background, the supporting character in someone else's story. And in some strange way, I'm grateful. If they hadn't tried so hard to cut me down, I might never have discovered how strong I could be when I stood tall. Their cruelty lit the fire that became my strength. If there's one thing my story proves, it's this. Never let anyone decide how bright you're allowed to shine. People will try. Out of jealousy, out of fear, out of their own insecurity, they'll tell you you're too much or not enough. They'll trim your edges, cut your hair, hide your light, all to keep you small. But you are not small. The moment you stop apologizing for your existence, the world starts seeing you differently. And yes, some people will hate you for it. But those people were never in your corner to begin with. Revenge doesn't always come in the form of destruction. Sometimes it's simply standing in the photo they wanted you erased from. Sometimes it's smiling when they expect you to cry. Sometimes it's thriving despite everything they did to dim you. And the sweetest revenge of all? Living without fear. So that's my story. They said I was too pretty to stand next to the bride. They tried to erase me, to humiliate me, to make me invisible. But instead, I left them with a memory they'll never be able to crop out. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or told you weren't enough, I hope this story reminds you of something. You have every right to take up space. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for validation. Stand tall, speak up, take your place. And if my story spoke to you, if you've ever had your own moment of standing tall, I'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below. What's one time you refused to let someone dim your light? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss more stories of betrayal, revenge, and resilience. Your voice matters here. And trust me, this is just the beginning.